Scholar Speaker Series Friday group. It's wonderful to be back together again. I think this is our first one this semester. Is it? It is our first one, so I'm really excited to have two really exciting papers to discuss and Roseanne to join us. But why don't we follow our usual practice and sort of go around the room and just check in and remind everyone who we are and a little bit about what we're up to. I'm Jonathan Simon. I'm the faculty director of the center, and I've been working on a book on the ideas that fuel punitiveness in modern societies. A short book, I promise. Why don't we go this way?
I'm Roseanne Greenspan, executive director of the center.
I'm Joanna Weinberg. I'm looking at hospitals and whether they have policies for seriously ill people and what they and what physicians do, whether they have policies for dealing with people who show up in hospitals seriously ill. It happens.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Gagan Chhabra. I'm a friend of Gagan's, and also actually I was the executive for Rose Bird's estate, and I was the one who got her papers here there at the Bancroft Library.
Wow, fascinating. I didn't know about that. Well, they've just been cataloged and they're available now. That's very exciting, certainly for legal studies people.
That's why I mentioned it.
I'm Lori Brown. I'm a friend of Raj, and I teach at Berkeley City College.
Great, welcome.
I'm Jennifer Sue. I was a recent graduate of UC Berkeley, majored in architecture and city planning, and I'm hard of hearing and I'm a friend of Gagan.
Welcome, thank you.
Hi, I am Haruna, a Japanese visiting scholar, and I am a lawyer in Japan, and I am very much interested in the disabled people who committed, especially who committed a crime. So I'm here for those the research in those that's the domain.
Hi everyone, my name's Johan. I'm a PhD student in the department here. I study the history of criminology.
Hi everybody, I'm Yoav. I'm a visiting scholar here from the University of Haifa, Israel. And I'm sort of also a student of criminology, of the history of the criminology.
Yes, I'm Mariyama. I'm associate professor of criminology in laws in Japan, and I'm visiting scholar up here. My main research is drug policy and death penalty. Yeah. Yep.
Hi, my name is Shiran. I'm from Tel Aviv University. I'm a PhD candidate and this year visiting scholar here. And my dissertation is about plea bargaining in international criminal law.
Hi everybody, I'm Holly. You'll be learning a little bit more about part of my work in the second half of today's seminar, but broadly I study the experiences of pretrial custody in Ontario, Canada.
Hi, my name is Gagan Chhabra. I am a doctoral candidate from Oslo Metropolitan University in Norway. I am a visiting scholar here and I'll be presenting here, so you'll know a lot more about my work. I work with disability policy comparisons and comparing the experiences of the youth.
Excellent. Well, we'll hear this in a moment. And do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Rita Marin. Relevant to this, I'm running the City of Berkeley Subcommittee on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities.
Wonderful. Are you going to do a PowerPoint, Gagan?
Yes.
So you may just want to sit so you can see the PowerPoint behind you.
There's room over here if you'd like.
Otherwise...
We'll have a hearing disability.
Oh, all right.
You'll be very close.
I can see.
Perfect.
All right.
Okay, because I'm just standing there.
So our usual rules are we're just going to split the time up and spend 40 minutes on each paper, and the speaker will speak for as much of that as they want, then we'll discuss and move on to the next paper. So without further ado, Gagan.
Yes, thank you. So first things first, thanks a lot, Jonathan and Center for the Study of Law and Society for giving me this opportunity to talk about my research project. And as the title of the presentation states, I'm going to talk about convergence within disability laws and policies into very different. converging disability laws in diverging country context, and I'll talk about how two very different countries such as Norway and India have come up with these two, have framed or formulated similar social regulation policies affecting the employment of persons with disabilities. So first, the ubiquitous facts or some general background. There are approximately 1 billion people with disabilities in the world. Approximately 15% of the world's population is disabled. These people are facing a lot of problems when it comes to the employment issues. They are kind of excluded from the labor market, and this has huge implications for when it comes to the costs, social costs as well as individual costs. These trillions of dollars are lost every year to the economy because of the fact that these people with disabilities are not included in the labor market. And this is a worldwide phenomenon. It happens in the global north countries as well as in the global south. It happens here in the United States, in Norway, in Germany, UK, all the other countries. And governments come up with different kinds of policies to tackle this problem of unemployment or underemployment for persons with disabilities. And employment is very, very vital, as you see that it's very vital for the international independence, for building social networks, for participating in the community, and for becoming more active citizens. Yeah. So when I talk about disability policy convergence, first it's important to unpack the idea of disability policies. It could mean multiple things, and I'm going to talk about if you think about disability policy subsystem, there are 3 aspects to it. First is the social benefit subsystem, wherein you might, as the name suggests, it is predominantly concerned with disability benefits, disability pensions, and anything which is financial transfer or redistributive in nature. The second subsystem is the social services subsystem, which is primarily concerned with personal assistance service schemes, for instance, the ones who need personal assistance to move around. And the third subsystem is the social regulation subsystem, which is predominantly concerned with how to create a level playing field in the society for persons with disabilities, anti-discrimination provision being one. So in this presentation, when I talk about policy convergence or policies becoming similar, I'm focusing predominantly about the third subsystem, which is the social regulation subsystem. I will not be focusing on first and second because, as you know, Norway and India cannot be compared on these two these countries are very different, and Norway and India cannot be compared on benefits, transfers, or service allocation because, there are huge economic disparities. So talking about what's the research question? The research question is why did these two significantly different countries adopt social regulation policies affecting the employment of persons with disabilities, and what has led to this policy convergence? And so first things first, what is social regulations? These are the policies which are designed for creating a level playing field, as I mentioned some moments ago. They're designed to function the labor market or market actors so that they don't misbehave, quote unquote. They don't discriminate in the labor market. So the predominant examples of social regulations are anti-discrimination provisions, accessibility norms, and universal design provisions, which have become pretty popular after the passage of Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990. And what is convergence? Convergence is this idea of the fact that the societies tend to become more similar. They start becoming following similar trajectory when it comes to structures, policies, programs, performances, and social regulation policy convergence can take place at multiple levels. It can take place at the level of policy goals, policy content, policy instruments, styles, and outcomes. So when I talk about convergence, I'm talking predominantly about social regulation policy convergence at the level of goals and content, not at the levels of instruments, styles, and outcomes, because two countries are very, very different. These two countries. Yeah. So this explains that why these countries are so different. If you think about it, Norway and India are having extreme disparities, be it on social, economic, cultural, political, legal factors. If you look at this slide, it's pretty self-evident. These countries are 2 worlds apart. One country is having a gross national income of approximately $66,000. The other country is languishing at $5,300. Norway is an extremely generous welfare state. with a lot of social democratic values. India, on the contrary, is a very protective welfare state, a lot of means and needs testing when it comes to implementation of disability policies. Similarly, if you look at the example of demographics, Norway is an aging society, India is going to be one of the youngest society in the world. So if you think of any conceivable macro level factor, these countries are very, very distinctive and different. So that's why you might be wondering what is happening here, why is he here, and how is he talking about similarities and convergence. So the idea is to be skeptical for sure. Like when I started this project, I wanted to be skeptical to the thought that convergence can only take place between two very similar looking countries, like Norway is similar to Sweden. So if you think about disability policies or comparative research, you should compare only like apples, but I kind of I'm pushing a bit of the boundary, if you will, of comparative disability research. Yeah, so quickly, the employment context for people with disabilities in Norway and India. As you see, the first couple of bullet points are very, very important because the idea is that Norway is this incredible welfare state on the in the northwestern periphery of Europe, and everything is great out there. But if you look at the statistics, they are pretty appalling. 43% of people with disabilities are employed as compared to 76-78% in the general population. And this trend has remained stable over the past 2 decades. And this is a major cause of concern. And the experts think that Norway is mediocre when it comes to the employment of persons with disabilities. In case of India, it's not a surprise that the employment rate for persons with disabilities is that poor because generally speaking, the Indian society is based on hierarchy, and exclusion of persons with disabilities from the labor market is taken. The appalling statistic is the one at the end, which says that only 1% of people with disabilities constitute the formal sector employment. Again, I should clarify that these statistics are merely used as heuristic. They cannot be compared directly, but the idea is to show to you or to the audience that the situation is pretty good in these countries. And because of this great situation, what has happened in the past 20 years is the countries have adopted similar sticks, carrots, and sermons. So this was my first research article, wherein they, as I mentioned, that they have come up with anti-discrimination provisions in Norway, as well as similar such provisions that come up in India. And there's huge focus on accessibility and universal design in both the countries. Similarly, when it comes to the incentives, the carrots are given like milk subsidies and in Norway, which is given a lot more than in India. But Indian state has also made efforts to make these milk subsidies to have similar kind of programs. And sermons are being preached. Similar sermons are being preached from different authors. Norway is using the Inclusive Working Life Agreement, and India is talking about national level awards for knowledge transfer. That's my first research article. So this is where I kind of explained that there is convergence taking place in these two different countries. Now, moving forward, why this this is the current topic, the 3 factors, 2 different countries, 1 direction of policy change, and the ideas, theories, and concepts which I have used for this particular article or this particular piece of research have to do with policy convergence, diffusion transfer, globalization theory, the diffusion of social regulations across Europe. These are the major theoretical ideas. Hypothesis is that these policies and laws are formulated by only country domestic priorities. Domestic influences are predominantly shaping the disability policies. And I undertook a policy review wherein I reviewed 24 policy documents, approximately the same, 13 from Norway and 11 from India. And what I found is, along with that and expert interviews, that the policies are converging and that there is a globalization of social regulation reforms. These are the 3 factors why disability policies and laws are converging in these 2 such different countries. So the first factor is the idea that European Union directives and UNCRPD and UN instruments are leading to international harmonization trend in these across the world when it comes to disability laws and policies. The second is the aspect of elite networking, that there's knowledge transfer taking place at a much faster rate than what it was pre-1990s. And then the final aspect of nothing about us without us, it goes without saying that now, today, disabled people and their organizations are a lot more mobilized, a lot more aware of their rights, and they're advocating their rights. So yeah, so a bit about these three concepts. International harmonization, we are living in an interconnected and interdependent world. There is this idea that we are sharing, we are encountering common problems, and these common problems require or call for common solutions. And this trend is pretty evident if you pick up environmental policy, if you pick up other policies relating to gender equality and so on. And in the disability sector also, this trend of international harmonization has become pretty strong, especially after the passage of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities after that happened in 2006. Similarly, when it comes to elite networking, if you look, that there is a lot of focus on people from different cultural backgrounds, elites, experts coming together and sharing the best practices, and they're undertaking this best practice sharing in different conferences and seminars. So that's again a major factor, and grassroots mobilization is, as I mentioned here, there is this idea of the fact that disabled people have become entrepreneurs. They know exactly what to argue for when it comes to the legal structures they want in society to create a much more equal, fair, and just society. And they have been arguing their rights through contentious political action, direct action, sit-ins on one side, and going to the courts and suing and taking the lawfare route. So this is the first factor, and the timeline, as you can see in this timeline, is pretty pictorial. I would like you to have a look at the European Union actions which have been taking place and how those actions have been followed by what changes have taken place in Norway. For instance, European Union came up with a disability strategy in 1996. Amsterdam Treaty was a provision to stop discrimination, was passed in 97, and suddenly in 1999 Norway talks about this human rights center approach because previously Norway was predominantly focusing on welfare redistributive policies. But around this time the focus shifted and the talk of anti-discrimination started becoming much more stronger. And as we move forward, we see European Union Equal Treatment Directive being passed in 2000, and Norway changes its policy in Working Environment Act, as well as it ends up bringing the anti-discrimination policy and laws. So it's pretty evident that this timeline shows that Norway has kind of followed the EU lead, if you will, when it comes to social regulation policies or reforming the disability policy landscape. What's the situation in India? As you see, in India, United Nations, India is not part of EU, so European Union directives will be of no consequence. But India has been following the United Nations lead, so standard rules came up, and prior to that, the Asia and Pacific Decade of Persons with Disability led to the changing of the policy landscape. Persons with Disability Act was passed in 1995. Moving forward in 2006, India adopted the national policy. India signed and ratified the UNCRPD around 2007, and 2016 led to the culminated with the Rights of Persons with Disability Act, which is pretty progressive in its nature. It has a reasonable accommodation duty and all the wonderful provisions which were passed in the Americans with Disability Act in 1990. So it took a lot of time, but finally India has reached to that level, that it has similar progressive law. Yeah, so this is what experts said. If you see, like as I mentioned, I interviewed policy experts, what is happening, why is Norway following this trajectory towards anti-discrimination laws? What has changed? They gave this as an example. One of the clear instances that European Union directives, as I mentioned, led to the harmonization of Norwegian law, although Norway is not part of EU. As this expert said, Norway is very good, it's very clever when it comes to following the EU and the good parts of EU. Similar is the case in India. The UN SCAP and the UN treaties have led to the changing of the laws. Interesting observation is this one. So if you look at in the disability policy landscape, the idea is that UNCRPD is a watershed moment and it has galvanized the disability movement worldwide. But if you look at the case of Norway, perhaps that's not the case. So when I asked them, what's the influence of UNCRPD, and the experts said, point blank, that it's for the poorer parts of the world. We are perfect. We have a lot of money. We are very good. So perhaps in some poorer countries like Fiji and Mozambique and India, perhaps it might have some difference, but we are pretty good. But when it comes to India, if you look, UNCRPD was considered as an important building block for the passage of the Rights of Persons with Disability Act. And without that, I think that all experts said that they thought that this kind of law would not be passed.
I just want a clarification,
yes,
if you wouldn't mind.
Sure.
The Norwegian disability rights activist who you quote here,
yes,
is this ironic or is this?
It was partly in jest, but also she was talking. She was being honest about the fact that she said that many people might not say it out loud, but I want to say this out loud because I want you to change things, to bring things.
So it is a critical statement rather than an affirmative statement.
Yes. Yes, it's a critical statement because the idea is that often in Norway people don't like, that's again part of the Norwegian ethos, that people don't like confrontation. It's a society based on consensus.
Thank you.
So, yeah. So, influence of elite networking, as I mentioned, in the past it was much more difficult for people and ideas to travel. But now, for instance, this expert said that elites are meeting, experts are meeting, they're writing reports for different organizations. In the case of Norway, it's the ILO and OECD and other such quote-unquote clubs. And in the case of India, it's UN network. When it comes to participating in the conferences, they are participating in different fora, but at the same time, the mechanism is the same, that they're learning from each other. And they're socializing. A lot of these people are coming to the United States and getting influenced by what the development is taking place in the United States. That came up as a pretty important theme. Yeah, this is what the experts said. It's pretty evident, as I mentioned, that Norwegian experts said that we are focused on how to follow the best smart practices taking place at the European level or at the American level. Similar is the case in India, that they are going for participating in conferences organized by ILO and learning about how to implement accessibility, what kind of anti-discrimination provisions should be there. Grassroots mobilization, again, it's nature of advocacy, as I was just alluding to. In case of Norway, it's very consensus driven. They have a benign outlook towards the state because state generally gives a lot of redistributed provisions to the organization. In case of India, that's not the case. There's a lot of confrontation, pretty much like in the United States, like the work of ADAPT or some of these other organizations wherein they would do sit-ins and so on and engage in lawfare activities. When it comes to the ultimate outcome of these like representation and consultation, it has increased in case of India after the passage of UNCRPD. It has become much more consultative and democratic. In case of Norway, it has a long legacy, and outcomes are pretty evident. As I mentioned, it's anti-discrimination provisions and laws have been formulated in both the countries. This is what the experts said in both these countries. So, as I mentioned, that experts are saying that now these people are undertaking self-advocacy. They are sitting on top of as decision makers. They are not just taking this decisions which are framed by the bureaucracy. Similar is the case in the case of India. The experts said that the current act would not have been passed. It was practically drafted by DPOs and CSOs. DPOs referring to disabled people's organizations. CSOs are civil society organizations. So these are the final concluding remarks that if you look at a global level, at the European level, the social regulation policies have proliferated across Europe. United States already has these regulations and reforms, but these reforms are not restricted only by geography now. These reforms are going to far and wide corners of the world. There is this idea of common perceptions are being framed in countries such as Norway and India, which are so different. Policymakers are thinking of problems such as discrimination prevailing in the labor market, the poor employment outcomes for disabled people, and the accessibility problems. And what I found is that there are still this spiral dynamic at play, wherein the policies are being changed not just by the external pressures like the trend towards international harmonization, but also by the grassroots mobilization, wherein people are talking about nothing about us without us, especially disabled people and their organizations. So there is, in essence, a globalization of social regulation reforms and policy convergence. And as I mentioned, I'm always with this four lines because generally speaking, when you think about comparative disability policies, compare apples to apples, and I'm kind of pushing the envelope, so I'm taking the road less traveled.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Do you want to join us back at the table, or do you want to stay up there? We've got plenty of time for so the floor is open. Maybe I'll just to get us going. So I was just trying to think, we thought about other areas of policy like climate change or like drug trafficking, to take something very different. We might also notice that at least the first two of your factors, international agreements and elite networking, are at work in those sites, and we might expect to find kind of policy convergence not just between India and Norway, but maybe on a broader level across the globe. What seemed really potentially distinguishing about this case was the role of grassroots, and especially the kind of claim to speak for disabled people to be at the table and to speak for themselves. So do you think that is creating more convergence here than we might find in some other policy areas because of that?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Like I think that, as I mentioned, this climate change, for instance, policies are also driven predominantly, like for instance, this Kyoto Protocol and so on, and like the current Paris Climate Accord, for instance, to give an example. And I think that these three factors, which I found, could also be found at other places. Like for instance, there are these climate activists also, which are mobilized and so across the world. But what is distinctive is the fact that disabled people and their organizations did not have that power, did not have that voice until very recently. And that's where, for instance, the work of ADA, like Americans with Disabilities Act, passing becomes very important, because that kind of gave the fillip to the world in a way, like at least in the disability literature, the decade of 90s is considered to be this golden decade which led to this progressive law proliferation from United States, started in United States, then UK for coming up with its own discrimination act, and Germany changing its constitution and saying that discrimination against people with disabilities is not good. So that aspect is pretty unique for disabled people for this convergence. But I think that if you juxtapose it with climate advocacy, there are climate activists, but it's not the same, because disabled people have been marginalized for so long. Climate activists cannot say that they have been marginalized for millennia, if you will. So their narrative has a bit lesser purchase, if you will, as compared to disabled people, because they have been people. Many of them said that non-disabled people have treated them. Non-disabled people are quote unquote parasites. They have created this disability industrial complex, wherein medical professionals, policy makers, welfare state bureaucrats, rehabilitation counselors have just controlled their lives for such a long. And now finally, they have the power to set the agenda. So that's pretty strong, right?
Chris Tomlins.
If one was to sort of twist the focus on the issue that you raise here just slightly, and to say that the issue you present is labor market participation, And then to add a kind of uniquely US vision of labor market participation, one might say, to what extent is this a debate about forcing people into the workforce?
That's a very interesting question, because that question would be very valid, because you're right that not everybody who is disabled wants to work. I should say that upfront. But the important thing is this, that many people who are disabled who want to work don't end up getting work. For instance, taking the example of the United States, Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990, and from that day till today, the employment rate for persons with disabilities has hovered around 30%, give or take 1 or 2 percentages. It has remained stable, and the general employment rate is around 65%. If you look at Norway, since 2000, the employment rate has been around 43%. The general employment rate has gone to 76, 78, 80% also in 2010, 2012, when the oil prices were very high. The economy was booming left, right, and center. But still, this pool of labor resource is never tapped into. And what's the reason why that's not happening? So a part of it has to do with the fact that there is discrimination in the labor market, that employers are not willing to hire people with disabilities. A part of it has to do with the access, that how would a disabled person end up going to the job, coming back from the job, organizing the logistics around that. And of course, a part of it has to do with the health factors and the disability pension system, for instance, or disability benefit system, that the moment you enter into the labor market and the government says, sorry, now you are working, so I will take away all the disability benefits, and the person loses the job and he or she loses the benefits. So they are kind of in this very tricky territory, and they don't want to take up job. So there is a lot of that those aspects also at play. So I think that the motivation so I will not say that all disabled people would want to work. There will always be people who would be unemployed or unemployable, disabled people. But at the same time, for those who want to work, social regulations are designed to make the labor market more inclusive, or to make the society more just and fair.
Sure. And I'll follow up with you. Go ahead.
Yeah.
So just to sort of to twist the focus now in the opposite direction, if you look at the history of industrial accidents, workman's compensation or workers' compensation was in effect designed to create a market in injury, such that employment injuries that disabled workers were compensable to the extent that the disabled worker could or could not be employed. So again, I'm sort of, what I'm doing, I guess, is kind of trying to think about the sort of a voluntary quotient here. To what extent does accidental injury or work injury become a factor in your analysis of how disabled people who may have been disabled within the workforce, how disabled people and labor market participation relate to each other?
You're referring to the problem of insider and outsider in the labor market. For instance, this is very important, especially in case of Norway, because, for instance, the Norwegian labor market has a very high threshold to enter. So, for instance, it's not like the quote-unquote hire and fire policy which is adopted in the United States, or, for instance, in Denmark, which has much more flexibility of hiring and firing, and security of the fact that for training and again making sure that people don't fall through the cracks. So you're right that when it comes, or at least for my analysis, I'm not focusing on the workman's compensation, for instance, aspect, because I'm talking about persons with disabilities in general. because the policies generally are framed, for instance, anti-discrimination policy does not necessarily talk about workers with injury per se. It says persons with disabilities, and then specific sections of Working Environment Act policies or some similar such policies in the United States would elaborate upon that. So I'm not going deep into that. My major focus was to understand at the level of policy goals and content, is there any convergence taking place? Because if you think about in the global South context, now many people don't even know that progressive policies exist. Like for instance, if people don't know that that a country like India has a legal framework that if you discriminate against a person with disability in the job interview, you could be taken to the court and you could be sued and you could be asked to give compensation, or there's a legal recourse. But so my idea was to is to now juxtapose these two very distinctive countries and eventually just argue, perhaps taking a bird's eye view of the situation, and argue the fact that these countries, despite their such huge differences, are following a progressive trajectory like Americans with Disabilities Act, which Americans with Disabilities Act started.
Joanne?
I want to focus on India for a minute. And you said it's a developing country. And the developingness is largely influenced by the United States and some European countries as well. And so you looked, and I think you just said that India's disability policies are very much based on the U.S. anti-discrimination policies. So it confuses me, because in a sense you're not, or maybe you're a little bit comparing Norway and India, but you're also comparing Norway and the United States. And as especially as India has become more and more developed because of the influence of the United States on other European countries. So it is in a sense the kinds of things that you're talking about are very much based on the policies of the U.S.
Yes. Actually, I should clarify this, that ADA is more like an indirect mechanism. It's like the inspiration is taking place from ADA, but nobody's acknowledging it directly. For instance, in case of India, the expert said, we have learned from the United Nations standard rules, or we have learned from the Asia and Pacific Decade of Persons with Disabilities, which was passed in 1992. But what preceded those two events was the passage of Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990. So they're not directly talking about the ADA per se, if you get my point. And what I want to say to you is, for instance, that reasonable accommodation duty, which was talked about in ADA, was not part of the discourse, the policy discourse in India until very recently. And in Norway, it became part of the discourse in the last decade. So there is this indirect channel of learning, but mostly the predominant learning which is taking place in Norway, or the policy formulation is changing because of EU directives in case of Norway, and UNCRPD or UN directives in case of India, and then going down to elites sharing best practices, and then grassroots mobilization. But all of them kind of indirectly talk about ADA, because ADA had the prime mover advantage. So ADA was the first, like America was the first country which came up with this fantastic progressive law, so it kind of gives a template for the world to come up with the UNCRPD 16 years later.
Floor is open. Please, sure.
So it is very interesting and in a way surprising. I want to ask, could you please elaborate more about the research in methodologies or the different research tools you're using?
Yes. Yes. Thanks for asking that. The time was so short and I had to talk so much. So I kind of just skipped through the whole part. So what I ended up doing is it was divided into two phases. In the first phase, I kind of did a policy review, wherein there is this portal called as Diverging.no, which is like kind of like state.no. Went there and searched for disability policies in Norway. And it gave me like some 20 hits or whatever from 1990, and I kind of put the limit 1990 as a starting point because of the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Because prior to that, there was no talk about anti-discrimination at a global level, if you will, or people did not talk about it with that much force, if you will. So I kind of put that as a threshold, and I started exploring the documents in Norway, and I drilled down to what documents showed up about social regulations, because a lot of documents talked about other two disability policy subsystems, social benefits and social services, because in Norway disability pension is a huge focus, for instance. And it's a very generous welfare state, so it focuses a lot on that. And then I moved to India, and in India it was a bit more difficult because we did not have like a particular portal for these kind of government policies. So it was more going through different government websites, civil society websites, and trying to understand what kind of policies have been enacted or developed. But in the case of India, it was a bit easier because India has dedicated laws. Persons with Disabilities Act, 1995. Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016. In case of Norway, it's more diffuse. They don't have such direct acts. They have kind of mainstreamed their disability provisions into the other general acts. For instance, the Working Environment Act has been altered a bit. So there were these nuances which I had to kind of navigate through when I was doing policy review. And when it comes to the expert interviews, when I was going through the policies or the documents or government white papers and public reports, I saw the list of the people who wrote these reports, so I kind of contacted them and started reaching out to them, and some of them said yes, we want to participate, and because we wrote this report, or others said no, I don't know too much about it. This was 20 years ago. I would ask you to contact some of the people. So I kind of used that kind of technique. So that's how I ended up recruiting people, 25 experts, 14 from New Delhi and 11 from Oslo. And they came from different walks of life. Some of them were disability rights activists, others were anti-discrimination officials, still others were people who were dealing with policy formulation and policy implementation. So that kind of led to these expert interviews. They were quite intensive and rich. They were audio recorded, transcribed, and then analyzed. Like I took some field notes after each interview because there was a lot of information coming through these experts, because they like to talk about the policies which they wrote and why they wrote these policies. So it was just like a very interesting experience. And finally, it was really it was all about drawing these converging lines of inquiry, as Robert Ian would talk about. So in the case study methodology.
We have time for one more. Johan.
Gagan, thank you very much for this today. I'm curious whether my sense of the broad brushstrokes of EU international law, one of the operative frames for that's codified in all sorts of statutes, is that dignity is the overriding frame of EU international law, which is perhaps distinctive from my understanding of the overriding frame of UN law, which tends to be equality. I'm wondering, while I was listening to your talk, I was thinking to myself, all right, he's building an argument about convergence, and I'm thinking, my intuitions here are that one of them is going to be a dignity frame, the other is an equality frame, and I was thinking to myself, oh, is the hypothesis here that dignity and equality would suggest we'd get something different, and this is surprising? Or is it rather that dignity and equality are actually very much keying into the same thing anyway? A simpler version of the question is, are dignity and equality different?
That's a simple
Yes.
Of course.
Short answer is yes, but if you look at, for instance, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, it's a beautiful piece of document. It's the first convention of 21st century, has ratification from almost 180 member states around the world, and EU ratified it jointly, So, so you're right about the fact that this focus on dignity has been there, has been kind of like a driving force in the EU policy formulation or EU policies. But after the fact, after this 2009 ratification by EU, of the UNCR, I think that the disability policy system has kind of converged on the idea that A, yes, we have to secure human dignity. B, we have to achieve equality because and substantive equality, because not just formal equality, because the idea is this, that disabled people have a right to vote, but if they don't have accessible voting machine, then what's the point of having a right to vote? For instance, it's a bit different as compared to, for instance, gender based discrimination or discrimination based on race or ethnicity, for instance. So the equality argument is much more encompassing, and it kind of for lack of a better word, it subsumes the dignity point as well in its broad discourse. So you're right, and I would invite you to just have a look at that 9-page document, and they talk about both those aspects in the preamble: securing, making sure that all people with disabilities are treated with equal worth, equal dignity around the world, and they have a right to security, autonomy, and they have a right to influence and equality.
I think we're going to have to leave it there. Do you want to have a brief comment, Rita?
Tailgating on to that.
Sure, go ahead.
The fundamental principle underlying the UN through its charter is the idea of non-discrimination. Can you hear me if I say so?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Non-discrimination. And that, the question of dignity and so on, come into it a little bit later when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is adopted by the General Assembly in 48. But the non-discrimination portion of the legal basis of the United Nations through its charter has actually been acted on only once, with the case of South Africa, whose constitution included apartheid. And that was the only country ever voted out of the United Nations when it took, South Africa left the General Assembly under orders, because that is the one point that cannot be in dispute under the UN Charter. And I often think that that has not had its full play in the jurisprudence surrounding UN declarations and, more importantly, treaties. It's due to come up, but the non-discrimination is the basis on which LGBT and the other aspects of the additions to language, nationality, economic status, and so on, are built in. Non-discrimination cannot happen. Discrimination cannot happen.
Yes. Thank you very much. And join me in thanking Gagan for a fantastic one more time for all of these topics. So take a minute to refill, get some more food, and we'll queue up colleagues.